To start, let me first briefly introduce myself as well. I'm Jae-Yong Park, and I'm the moderator for the artist talk today. And I work as a writer, curator, and translation interpreter. And actually, I worked with SUPERFLEX before, back in 2016-17, when we did the APAP, Anyang Public Art Project, together for its 5th edition. SUPERFLEX and we were actually wanted to construct a building, which obviously didn't happen in the end. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit later. And as I said, today's talk will be conducted in 2 languages, and I have 2 roles here as a moderator and translator to myself. So, to start the artist talk, let me start with the very stereotypical questions. You had your solo exhibition back in 2019 at Kukje Gallery Busan. And at the time, you couldn't actually make it to Korea. And maybe this is the first time, no? You did, okay. One of you did.
This one.
Okay. So maybe I can frame it as 3 of us coming together to have a solo show in Korea is the first time. So I'd like to hear from you about your observations or anything that you'd like to share with the Korean audience here to have the show here in Seoul for the first time all together.
Hello. So I'm Björn Stern. Maybe it's a little bit of a travel back, a short one. So we were first time 2002 invited for the Gwangju Biennale, curated by Charles Esche and Hu Han-woo. And it was inviting a lot of collectors from all over the world to come together. Also to a certain moment in time, I think that was also quite a crisis time. So we really got to get together, all these groups from all over the world. There was a lot of clash, there was a lot of enjoyment, there was a lot of learning. There were a lot of Korean groups also. So we really also got to very directly learn about some of our perspectives as an outsider, thinking that Korea was such a strong economy and everything was going well, where the Korean groups were looking at us and say, it's actually not going that well. You really should reconsider. And then there were some, let's call them debates. Even all the foreign groups were sent out of the room for a certain moment of time for the Korean groups to reunite and rethink. So that was quite a moment in time and a learning, and I'd say we fell in love with also being in Korea, because later on then in Gwangju, and actually being invited back to Gwangju for the biennial 2 more times, so it's the 3rd time we've been there, and then we were also invited to a Folly, which is a permanent work called Power Toilet. It's a copy of the UNESCO executive building in Paris. Later on then the Busan Biennale and Anyang, and taking part in 2 shows next door, and then we are now again another time. So it's been a long relationship. And sometimes we do feel very Korean at moments.
So I think actually SUPERFLEX has been working together as a collective for more than 3 decades now, and belated congratulations for your 30th anniversary, which was last year. And I think if you just take a look at the Wikipedia page of SUPERFLEX, which was actually freshly edited in March 2024, I think SUPERFLEX is not your typical artist in a way. And if you have time, just Google SUPERFLEX and take a look at the Wikipedia page, and you will find some interesting information, such as SUPERFLEX has received many awards, but not necessarily from the art world. SUPERFLEX has awarded by the architects, for example, awarded by the public policy entities, for example. So I'd like to say that you can actually meet SUPERFLEX's work not only within the art world gallery setting, but maybe on the street, and sometimes SUPERFLEX's work can be the whole street, and it can be some district of the city or some part of the ocean even. So actually, SUPERFLEX's work can take many shapes. One of them is maybe a poster on the street, And not only you can see it on the street, you can actually, it's not an advertisement, but you can actually purchase it on the SUPERFLEX website, and you can make it as part of your living space even. If you are in line with what they would like to say, maybe if you want to make a statement, you can actually, and a lot of people actually do have their work in their working space, living space, and their maybe their own public space. So I think now is a good time to talk about this work, which is also present at this edition of the Venice Biennale, and also it was the work that you have been recently invited to the Gwangju Biennale as well. And I think this poster, as these pictures show, became a statement for so many people. So maybe could you explain a little bit about that?
Yes, as you can see, so it's both a poster in the street, but it's actually also an artwork as a mural. This is in the National Museum. Then there's a stack of posters, so you can take a poster for free. So this has then been work that has been presented among others in the Gwangju Biennale, where people could then take a poster. So it's in the museum, it's in the street, it's in people's home. So it tells very much also about that, of course, context matters, and your perception of what the work means to you in your personal home. So it represents your thinking, also the wording in the text itself also, or maybe you can relate very much to foreigner and us. As you know, it also represents very much, the kind of collisions that we have today. So much out there. So this was done in 2002. This poster, it's called a direct commentary using public space, the street, to comment upon a very right-wing, xenophobic approach from not only the Danish government, also many other European governments at that time, but particularly Denmark, being also a social welfare state from the north. Everyone looks at them as being, open-minded and welcoming and so on. But actually we are some of those who have the harshest, let's call it immigration laws, and we continue on making it even more hard and more strict. And now everyone else is adapting them. So it has become the policies of the EU. So of course a work can be a work in itself like that, but it represents those who use them. So we are of course happy that Venice Biennial chooses it. The overall topic of the Venice Biennial, maybe that's important to say, so I speak so long, strangers everywhere. Foreigners, not strangers, but foreigners everywhere. So of course we're happy that we are in that context.
Yeah, and I think regarding the current exhibition, of which the title is Fish and Chips. Fish and chips is actually Irish food, but you are not meaning the Irish food by the title of the exhibition. So could you maybe tell us about why you have titled the exhibition in Seoul as Fish and Chips? Rasmus, maybe?
Yes. Hello, Jim. It's good to see you again. It's been a while. Fish and chips. In a sense, we all know what it is. But fish and chips have nothing to do with each other. But still they do through this Irish dish called fish and chips. In the exhibition you have two main spaces and an intermediate space. And one space deals very much with economy, and the other space deals very much with the ocean. In the economy space, the white space, there are these paintings, kind of portraits of microchips, the ones we have on our credit cards. And it's a kind of, making the invisible structure of capitalism visible. And then there's this sort of more wet space, the space dealing with the ocean. And you might ask yourself, what do these two spaces have to do with each other? The economy, the ocean? On paper, really nothing. But if you think about it, everything. in the sense that the way we conduct our business, the way our economy is organized, has a large influence on the world itself and also on other species. It has even an influence on the climate. So there is a connection, just like there is a connection with fish and chips. So it's a kind of pun, I would say. And as you also see in the third space, there is these 3 text works. And this is also a text work, I guess. So this working with language, and maybe it's a very Scandinavian thing also, that you sort of use language to point at things that are both dark and funny. And that's a way of sort of coming to terms with the world itself.
Which I think applies to the title of your previous exhibition at Kukje, which was "In Our Dreams We Have a Plan." As if we have a plan only in our dreams. I think this also connects to the name of the collective, SUPERFLEX, which in American slang, flexing on the couch endlessly, or a recent buzzword in the athletic field, where the football players can have any position with the full stat. However, these are the recent usage of the name. You established more than 30 years ago. So what was it that you made this name as SUPERFLEX?
There's a long story and a short story.
Short one, please.
Okay. 30 years ago, when we were art students in Copenhagen, I think we felt the need to create a 4th member of there's Jakob, Bjørnsen and me, and then SUPERFLEX. In the sense that it seemed as if everyone was getting extremely locked into their own identity, and we wanted somehow to avoid that by having this almost like an avatar that had an identity that was exactly what we made it into, in the sense SUPERFLEX could be pretty much anything. And that's what we wanted to have as a framework for the way we were envisioning the work. We didn't want the work we were creating to be like anything related to our personal history as middle-class Danes, but something that you know could almost pop up in any possible setting, and it just seemed like an obvious choice. So that's the short story, and then there's a long story also, but we'll keep that for the next exhibition.
And I think the choice to put the word super is also very interesting, because it can have both positive and negative connotation in a sense. Were you also thinking in such a way 30 years ago? So
I remember like there was quite a lot of other super things popping up. There was a supermarket chain in Denmark. It used to be called Brugsen, and then it became Super Brugsen. But the shop stayed the same. Prisons became not just prisons, but super max prisons. So it was like a word that was being played around with a lot, and it wasn't quite clear what sort of the intention. It wasn't, exactly what it would. What would the we could also just have been called flex, but it sort of seemed fitting 30 years ago. I don't know. This is a long time ago. I don't really remember.
There's also maybe the most important is that there was never really another name on the table, right? So many of our artworks also became super something. So we made internet TV platform called Super Channel. Nothing else was called Super Channel. It was like a tiny little thing in a little studio, and then small studios around the world with small communities, pensioners, and so on, broadcasting through our platform and our artwork. And that was super. right? Super gas and so on. So it's something to play with. Yeah, I also don't remember another name. So that's all.
I think I'd like to take the discussion now further into build upon what we have just talked about. That going back to the multiplicity or multi-sidedness of your work, I think maybe you could share a little bit of your projects that took place totally outside of the art world setting of the White Cube.
Well, maybe that also it shows in. Yeah. Maybe it also shows in this. We always had an interest in not only being inside the art world. We have a common background in documentary photography. That's actually where we met. And with documentary photography, you look at the world and you try to make some kind of aesthetics about the world. That's how we saw it. We got sort of fed up with that. We ventured into art school. We started to do things where we ourselves was a part of the photography and showing our own reality. But I don't know, somehow I guess we always felt a little bit stuck in the art world. I mean, we are trained as artists, we are trained in the sculpture department, the Royal Academy of Art in Copenhagen, but we always wanted to look out. So a lot of the projects, a lot of the works are dealing with, or at least presented in the outside of the art world as well. So like the poster, we like the idea that it's in the street, it's in the museum. We like the idea that we do sculptures that we show here that are custom sculpture price, but at the same time you can buy a poster like you did for a couple of $20 or whatever it is online, or you can get it for free in the museum. So we like this multi-level way of working within the art world or the society as a daughter space.
So in some cases, I think you take it to really extreme, like super kiln, which is the whole, maybe, I can say it's maybe the whole neighborhood that you have taken, not as an artwork, but as, how should I?
Well, actually,
project?
I think we define it as artwork,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't really care what other people define, so you can do your own version. But just to explain shortly, briefly, it's a public space in Copenhagen. It was very near our old studio there. It was a competition for architects. We entered into the competition together with the big architects, and this is a neighborhood that we know it quite well because we live next by. And the concept, or the basic concept, not to go too deep into it, is that the normal thing would be to sort of do some spaces that are nice to be in, and it's all sort of kind of neutral somehow. We wanted to take it to the next level. We work as a collective. We wanted to include the people living within the area as a part of the collective of designing the park. So we would do, there was done a survey on what is needed to have in the park, like playgrounds, sitting areas, whatever. And then we would invite the audience or the public to be part of choosing which objects.
Maybe to talk about the travel to collect the speakers.
Yes, I mean, besides from inviting the people living within the area of the park to suggest objects from whatever place they desire. I mean, you have to know that the area is a very diverse area in terms of economy, in terms of social status, and also just in the simple way of how the different kind of housing are. I mean, you have projects that are sort of more like social housing, you have rentals, you have private ownership, so you have multiple different kind of economies in the space. And also, at that time, probably it hasn't changed much, but there was like more than people with roots in more than 60 different nationalities living within this small area. So it's a super diverse area. So one of the reasons, besides from involving people, to ask them to suggest objects for the park, was also to sort of play on the idea, like almost if you imagine the UN building, you have a lot of people, different people sitting outside, inside the building, and then outside they show all these flags to show what's inside the building. So we wanted to use the park sort of as a way of showing who's living in the neighborhood. So there will be objects from all over the world. picked by people living in the neighborhood. When you do this kind of public project, you have this like public engagement or participation. It's often done in very specific ways, and it has like specific outcome also. Of course, we were pushing people to come with different proposals, but we thought it was interesting to take this a step further. So we did something that we called participation extreme, which is sort of a little bit the idea of these horrible American TV shows where they do these extreme shows, was called Extreme Makeover. Extreme Makeover, thank you. Where they go to a suburban house. So they ask the kids in the house, what would you like? And then they'll say, I want this kind of whatever, dolphin space, or I want something. And then there will be this team of almost like Disney producing people coming in and doing the whole thing. And it will look quite horrible, but it will be interesting somehow. Mostly what we found interesting about this was the energy within, that they will go to a house and they will say, okay, let's go, let's do it. And this kind of American push way of pushing. Normally when you have these kind of processes in cities, they're super slow, you have meetings and they have a certain pace. So we wanted to add this kind of extreme makeover into this park. So we did the participation extreme, where we would go travel with 5 groups from the neighborhood, from the area, to their choice of destination, and to pick an object or find an object that they would like to bring back to Superkilen. And Superkilen was then, there was like 5 objects. One was actually what you see on this image. All the stripes that end up in this hill. That's soil from Gaza, from Palestine. So we traveled with 2 girls that have Palestinian background all the way and picked soil and we brought back to Superkilen.
When was the Superkilen? The year of the?
2012.
Actually, they started 2008, the concept development, and was ready 2012. Right? But maybe I just wanted to add something, because you were hinting towards that this was not an artwork. So this we would reject this perspective, because why can an artwork not be an infrastructure? Why should we confine art to that it is in certain spaces, certain contexts, certain size? So for us, it's natural to think about this as one big, let's call it sculpture infrastructure or artist infrastructure, because this is the only way that we can also maybe make change perspectives. And this is one of the most prominent and strong features of the art world, is that an object or creating a certain setting can transform and change your perspective of a reality. Because so here it is to go with these young girls to Palestine. Normally people bring back a little bit of soil if they're lucky. They wanted 3-4 cubic meter of soil from their grandmother's olive field. Right? So that's a lot of material that you carry, and this is also, you can consider that as a sculpture, as an infrastructure, but it depends on your perspective. So we think that art can also be infrastructure, and that therefore, it is an artwork. It's just a big artwork.
And to me, many of your works, including the Superkilen, including the posters, they look fine. They look really nice and beautiful. But I also think that it's not the point that you'd like to make some beautiful, or maybe art historically speaking, retinally pleasing works. It's more than that, I think. And also, on your website, you actually made it publicly accessible, that there's a huge PDF on your website which details about your concept of tool and the user revolving around your practices and projects. So I also like to hear a little bit about your approach to the art practices. That's just more than making beautiful stuff, and sometimes even using a little bit unfamiliar word of tool and user, which is beyond artwork.
Yeah, I think Duchamp said that all art making is an endless cosmic ping pong between all artists, dead and alive. And I think that's very much not just a sort of a utopian statement, but actually a very factual description of what creative processes look like. So in that sense, I think SUPERFLEX is also just kind of saying and conducting things as they actually are already. So in that sense, I don't think we're that unusual. We just sort of acknowledge that the creative process is fundamentally a collective process. And in that sense, the example you just saw with the park, it's a bit like taking the process that started out between Jakob, Bjørnsten and me, and sort of expanding it to the citizens living in this part of Copenhagen, and seeing what sort of comes out of that. And when you enter that space of a creative process, you don't really know what's going to happen. And it seems to be the case that the more sort of open-minded we enter the space, the better the stories are that comes out of it. So in that sense, we have a certain method that we started out sort of working on between us, and then since then it's been, you know, this sort of attempt of applying it to others as well. In this case, citizens in Copenhagen, and as you will see also in the exhibition here, also other species. So we wanted to basically take the method developed, I would say, 30 years ago between us, and then apply it to citizens in the design of a park. But as you will see in the exhibition here, also fish. So it's a bit like imagining that the new members of SUPERFLEX are fish, like new partners. And with these partners, we sort of develop works. And I'm not scared of, what did you call it, retinal
pleasure.
Pleasure? Mm-hmm. Retinal pleasure is pretty good. I kind of like it. I'm not ashamed of that. That's part of it. And I think all sort of storytelling, that sort of retinal pleasure is one of the sort of tricks, Jeon. We shouldn't shy away from that. And humor is another one. So I think, you know, you have a sort of cocktail of retinal pleasure and humor and storytelling, which are sort of, you know, essential to the methods of SUPERFLEX. And the slides you have up here speaks very much also of a period of SUPERFLEX work where we tried to find new ways of describing what we were doing. So actually at that point I don't think we spoke much, we didn't use the term works, we used the term tools. Sort of trying to sort of play with the idea that whatever we made, it was a tool for something else. So that was like an open invitation to sort of, okay, we don't know what's going to happen here. This is a hammer. Whatever you do with it, I don't know. But it was sort of a way of maybe breaking down this sort of object, subject, work categories. So in that sense, that's, I think, the short version of a description of things.
That's why a short version.
Let's see how long it gets now.
So the question from the floor is that you didn't talk about what or when you decided to specifically come together as SUPERFLEX, although you briefly mentioned that you kind of sort of felt the need to have the fourth member in addition to you three. And also, in addition to that, this is a question from myself as well, that I kind of wonder what you did before you become SUPERFLEX.
We come from very different backgrounds, very different family backgrounds, and I think let's more focus on the moment of choice of becoming then SUPERFLEX. And you know, it's, I think Rasmus also explained it before, that you know the celebration of this single genius artist is overpowered. It has too much strength in general in the world. So we wanted to then create this collective body, SUPERFLEX, not only a friend but actually a body with 6 legs, right? And we bring in our experiences. We were fortunate enough to, after high school, I mean, Rasmus met in high school, but afterwards go travel, learn, explore, see how you can live differently than the safe space in Denmark. We come from a welfare state, Scandinavia, so it's, of course, our perspective is very much from there. And we are lucky enough that we have gotten several other perspectives since then, by working with a multitude of different specialists around the world, but also being placed in some of the most extreme places also. One being dumped inside the Amazon, Brazilian Amazon, in a residency, and just having to spend 3 months there without anyone speaking our language, and so forth. So this is more what forms SUPERFLEX that I personally think is more interesting than thinking about what we did before, or what kind of hobbies we have. It is about that coming together as a collective body, also trying to challenge the notion of what an artist can be. And that again is what an artist should do all the time. What are the realities that we live in now? It doesn't mean that you cannot be completely transformed from a painting that is 500, 1,000, 10 million years old.
And speaking of which, that you have mentioned that you have been expanding collaborations with different bodies. And I see that now you are, I mean, it's already a few years now that you also have been expanding your neutral network even to the non-human entities. So I'd like to hear from you also about the progression of expansion of your practice in terms of working with others, working with specialists, working with things or entities that sometimes you cannot even control and try to engage with.
This is the SUPERFLEX studio, part of the studio. It's underwater. And as you can see, we are sort of putting some sculptures up, and we're trying to sort of, in this particular work, understand the difference in the ways the fish react to the 3 different sculptures. We use as you might have noticed also, the number 3 a lot. So here we are in the expanded version of the SUPERFLEX studio, and we're trying to understand how aesthetics kind of play into the life of fish. And unfortunately, it is the case that we cannot yet speak with fish. So I can speak to Bjørn and Jakob sometimes. Sometimes I understand what they say, but I can't speak to a fish yet. Fortunately, there's some really advanced science going on, where the movements of fish in relation to space is kind of rendered by AI and comes out in a kind of secret language. So we, in this particular experiment, you see here the expanded version of the SUPERFLEX studio, we work with scientists also. They interpret what the fish are saying, and they tell us, and we try to make that inform our aesthetic practice.
And I think this also relates to the installations or sculptures that we see upstairs, which are intended to be, for us humans, it's the sculpture, but you are intending it to be something else as well. Actually, the whole K3 is filled with these double meanings of, or even double lives of the objects. So I know that you have made so many non-human friends. Or could you introduce us a little bit of them as well?
Yeah, they can't breathe in spaces like this. But maybe it's important to also say that we are Danish, and Denmark is this very low, laying, sort of almost like Scandinavian atoll. We don't have any mountains. Our highest hill is like 170 meters tall. So if the current development of the world is continuing, we will sort of be the Scandinavian version of Bangladesh, meaning things we make will eventually be underwater. And I think artists, one of the gifts of this particular space of human thinking is that we can sort of try and imagine deep time. We don't have to be like journalists. We don't even have to be like archaeologists. We can imagine sort of deep futures and deep past. It's almost our obligation, I think. So what we make now will potentially be relating to other species in the future, especially in a country like Denmark. And that's sort of, almost like an obligation when you have a practice such as SUPERFLEX, where we like to think we're not just creating objects for clients, we're actually creating objects with the clients. So in that sense, we need to start talking to fish.
Actually, there are a list of questions that's been prepared, but since time is of essence, and also people have shared their very precious time in the Tuesday afternoon, I'd like to cut off myself and give the mic to the floor. So the sculptures seems to be a kind of a tool to communicate with the non-human entities of fish. But even before talking about fish, the stones are also non-human entities. So was there a specific approach or method when you were dealing with the objects of stones?
Yes, definitely is, and thank you for that recognition or observation. So when we didn't even say that we were expedition leaders of a boat, of a ship, where we decided to dive in deep in the Pacific to try and learn what is in the deep ocean. It covers 70% of the planet, the big blue. So it's naturally to try and understand the preferences of what is in the sea, particularly when sea level is rising. There's a lot of new friends, a lot of new guests that are coming. So instead of pushing them away, why not find a method and a way of listening and learning and then transforming what we build on land. And when we didn't think about materials and also ways to adapt, so we learned from different specialists. So we also developed an architectural manifesto, and one of them states that you have to maximize surface. Because in the sea, let's imagine that you've been diving and there's a ship that has sunk. There are so many different types of surfaces and different types of cracks and holes and so on that almost mimic a coral reef, but that's a human-made structure. So learning from that inspires us then to create structures, sculpture material that is then a sculpture and artwork, but also listening to what we said before, an artwork is much more than just an artwork. It's also a multitude of use, both philosophically but also practically. And they can transform in use over time. And so the materials have also transformed use. So some of the stone materials are actually having fossils, layers. So it's a stone from a specific geological time. And you see all these fossils. You see also siphonophores, which is actually one of the friends that you will meet up in K3. And they are embedded into these layers because a lot of the planet, a lot of land that is now land was submerged. So therefore, if you look at that material, then you can take it. It used to be organic matter that existed and was breathing, and now it's a stone. And now we then take that stone and we transform it into architecture for those organisms that are also forming the material that we're using.
Hello, I'm going to ask you. So, involving others in a participatory way in their practice, as you do, requires different roles and communication between yourselves and the others that form part of the practice. And I was wondering if you could expand more on the way that you structure your works to evolve different roles depending on the project for the participants of your work.
I think you learn certain tricks over the years. I mean, just to tell you one of them. For example, in you learn, for example, it doesn't usually. Also, if you see kids, for example, if they play a game, it's kind of unusual if they say, I think. It's more that they sort of do something, they can actually imagine a we much better than we can, us corrupted grown-ups. So in that sense, they're, small things that you can sort of, push. So, it doesn't become like, for example, a negotiation or a democracy where we have to vote on something, but it's more like an organic we that moves in a certain direction, like a fish school almost. Well, of course there's individuals, but they also kind of move around in this sort of almost strange collective body that and you have to surrender to that sort of. It doesn't really matter if it's people or fish you work with. It requires that sort of kind of non-democratic but yet open space. But it's almost like you have to de-school yourself of how we are brought up to sort of specialize and sort of fight for our, points of view, and more that it's what you're doing is something outside yourself. And then you can sort of apply that to, I'm applying it to these two gentlemen, but you can apply it to many other settings as well. Sometimes also settings with no language. We also work with children. We work with, at the moment, like an old lady in Copenhagen who's 102 years old. So there's a lot of sort of non-middle-aged art schools kind of, people where you have exactly the same references and you wear the same clothes. It requires a sort of this almost like childish sort of way of being in the world, I think.
Oh, hi. So, you guys have been working over 30 years, and I was just wondering, your motivation in the beginning, and after 30 years now, how does that change? How has that changed? And also, how the meaning surrounding your work, like the context, how that changed over the 20, 30 years. I'm just curious about that.
Maybe we can all three answer that question. You probably hear three different responses. But maybe if we return to the very first image that we saw, which is actually 30 years old, almost. It shows Jakob, Jan and me in the Ngorongoro crater in Tanzania. And at that time, we were not really talking that much about animals and interspecies stuff. But we were making this sort of energy system. And in the process of doing that, you have to wait for the organic material to ferment and produce gas. That's another story. So we started recording animals and started making music with these animal recordings. So there was this sort of interest in animals, like almost 30 years ago. But we didn't really think of it as part of, the way we think of it now, but it was there. So I sometimes I'm surprised sort of to see that in a way SUPERFLEX has changed a lot, but in a way it's also completely the same. So it's like a kind of a weird organism that I sometimes am a bit confused about because I don't really understand it. And maybe that's why it's still around, that it's still sort of alive. And it's still very close to its initial sort of starting point, but it's also very different. So it has a sort of double meaning all the time. Like we do works now here in the K3 about fish, and there's a lion and a monkey and a duck there. I mean, there's always been animals and they keep coming back, and other topics such as power and transformation and the other things we've talked about. They're there, but they maybe have sort of different volumes at different periods. But maybe the main themes are kind of quite the same.
So, unfortunately, this concludes our talk for today. And Bjorn, Rasmus, and everyone, thanks for sharing your time, and for the audiences as well. Do you have anything to?
No, just thank you very much for your patience. And get submerged upstairs.
Okay.